Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Arthur Brown story. We've obviously done part 1 and part 2. It's been fascinating and there was so much to talk about. We thought we'd do a part 3 and we are going to finish this time. So Arthur, of course, was very famous many years ago when he had #1 hit with Fire around the world, and he had a fascinating career. He has a strong spiritual side as well as a ever-changing musical side, and we're going to look at both of those in the last part. I'll just show you, there is actually a vinyl version of his first album, The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. He has a newish album out, Zim Zam Zim, which we'll talk about later because lyrically that's very interesting, and lots of other CDs we'll go through later on. So thank you for coming back all the way from Lewis.
Oh, a pleasure indeed.
And let's start part 3 with, in 76, 77, punk broke in the UK musically, and it changed a lot of things. And I'm very grateful to punk because that's how I could start my own record label, Cherry Red, because before that you had to basically artists had to sign to one of the major companies. It wasn't very easy for independent labels, but it changed the whole thing. And most established artists were just dismissed by the new breed of bands, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Damned, the Buzzcocks. They're all written off as irrelevant. But you weren't written off, were you? They held you in quite high regard.
Yeah, I know occasionally I'd bump into Johnny Lydon and we'd have a little chat, and it was very nice. So he didn't think I was one of the off in their own world hippie people. And I suppose there was a certain amount of confrontational stance in the crazy world, and myself particularly, which appealed to the punk mentality, as well as the fact that I just did what I wanted.
Which was the punk attitude. Do what you want. You can't play a guitar, learn 3 chords, and you're a 3-chord wonder.
Which, considering the early pop records were, 3, 4, maybe 5 at the most, it's not far off, is it?
Yeah. So, in a way, I suppose that was nice for you because you were included in something that was a great upheaval in the music business. But for you, life was going on. But what I want to come on to is, which came out right from the beginning of our interview in part 1, really, this strong spiritual side in you. And you did a course in Beshara, Chisholm House in Scotland. Just briefly tell us what that was, what that Beshara teaching is.
Well, it was founded by a Turkish fellow who came over to England under the school over there, their advice, and he had just decided that it was a complete waste of time. I think he came in about 1963 or 62, when suddenly all the alternative culture, the hippie culture, started to blossom, and all those ideas became current, and particularly an interest in spiritual things. And so he ended up, he was in his shop one day, and this group of people who were studying all the world's traditions, they were just young people in London, happened to come in to look at his kileems, his rugs. And one of them spotted in the back room this shelf full of these books all about that. And so they started to talk about it, and he'd pull a few books down and they would say something and he would reply, and they thought, oh, this fellow seems to know a lot. So in the end, they got together, got a farmhouse in Oldsworth in Gloucestershire, which was only about 8 miles away from the Gurdjieff place, Mr. Bennett's school that I'd been to. And they really loved the fact that Mr. Bennett had managed to persuade these people to come and put themselves through all these very demanding dances, decision exercises, consciousness exercises. And they thought, well, we'll put our own type of school together. And so they did up in Scotland. First of all, in the same school when Mr. Bennett left it, in, where was it? Anyway, Gloucestershire, I'll remember the name in a minute. And so they formed their school, and then when it formalized and crystallized into a more advanced thing, moved it to Scotland, which is where it is now, Chisholm.
And what attracted you to that?
At that time, I found the Gurdjieff teachings were a little cold.
A bit dry, weren't they? Yeah.
And although I found them extremely transformative, and I've, over my life, come to value them more than I did even then, I also, so I went over there to study, and it was at a time when, the fire was very, very popular. And we were getting all this, devil worship stuff, accusations and Satanisms and things. And I was trying to work all that out, thinking, well, I don't feel like that. So what is going on? And some of the ideas they came up with in the Beshara place seemed to fit the bill as far as giving me a wider context. And so in that school, what you did, you had different people coming from the world's different traditions. You had people from the Jewish approach, giving experiential little courses on the Kabbalah. You had the Sufi people. You had, and of course, it was all pinned on this Spanish Arab, and his writing. He was called Ibn Arabi, and he was known as the son of Plato because he was the first one to write down all of the ideas and the philosophical background of that tradition.
Okay.
So we did practices from all of them, and used, mantra or wasifas. It was not so much focused on music. Of course, the Gurdjieff one was. So that was,
yeah.
And it was one of the basic statements in that place was, I am a hidden treasure, and I created the world that I might be known. And from there came the expression in the universes and everything. And so we had to work backwards and find what it was like, this hidden treasure.
Yes.
Well,
in a way, that's what we're all looking for, whether we're aware of it or not, is the hidden treasure that's within somehow. It's
yes.
Within, but not just within. It's also everywhere.
Yes.
We'll come on to more of that later, but I just wanted to give an idea, perspective of your life, because after that, you really weren't earning money. You'd spent the money that you had, and you ended up for a time living in a prefabricated house or apartment in East London with very little money, which must have been quite tough.
Yeah.
One time here you were a world star, if you like, and you're living in almost poverty.
Yeah, and it was the case that it was a period when I wanted to do electronic investigation. I went over to Africa, came back, worked with Klaus Schultz in the electronic field, and then put together this album with Vincent Fuss and the Speed of Light.
Yeah, we talked about that in part 2, yeah.
Well, one of the things was that was when the fact that the punk ethos had come in.
Yes. People
looked at this album and said, well, it's got orchestras on it. It's like, not, and so that was part of the decision at that time to go and live in America.
Yeah. So you moved to Austin, Texas, and one of the things I noted from the book, which I'll show again later, was that Peter Gabriel was playing, and he said to you, "You'll see a lot of yourself in my performance tonight," which was another endorsement, if you like, of how you'd influenced bands like Genesis.
Yes. Well, they did used to occasionally support us before they became enormous on the circuit with Kingdom Come.
Yes.
And it was a really strange thing, because the Kingdom Come were a wild bunch, and they'd be drinking and cavorting around the dressing room. Genesis would be reading some very quietly reading. And in those days, Peter used to stand and play the kick drum with his right foot, because he had been a drummer, I remember. Okay. And he was kind of watching all of that.
He was taking it in and not realizing he'd use it in the future somehow.
Yeah. I think so, along with other bands they played, you know.
And he also credits you with turning him on to African music, because you'd been in Africa for a time and you was playing him, telling him about the richness of African music.
Well, when I met him after I'd been to Africa, we realized that we were both really interested in African rhythms and things. And at that time, you know, Ginger Baker had been over there years before, but it wasn't a terribly current place to be going. And so I thought, well, why don't you go to Africa? Because you're so much into African rhythms. And he was looking for, you know, his direction. And so he went off to Senegal, and there he saw Yusuf Nadour. Within a period of 10 days, that was it. And he had all of it. And, you know, I was just one of the influences he had, that's all, at that time. And
then you, I think this is the album you referred to earlier, the Requiem, was that the album you referred to earlier? That was an electronic album.
Yes.
And that was based on war, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, and it was, one of the tracks was about it's quite surreal, and one of the tracks was about the last missile on the Earth, and how they buried it with full honors, like a hero. And so the chorus goes, "The missile is dead, the missile." And then there were other things examining war and, you know, what mentality leads to it, and why do we bother with it?
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, war, isn't it? It's horrific, and it's fascinating, because you read a lot, didn't you, about war to help you come up with the angle for the album.
Yeah, and I was surprised. I read the last communications of some of the German soldiers when they were in the final battles, surrounded, and knew that they were probably going to die.
Yeah.
And you know, letters writing home saying, "Well, I don't know why I'm in this stupid war. I never believed in it anyway, and now I'm going to die." And there was just such a kind of pathos in there, and at the same time, the stupidity of our way of doing things.
And then you were attracted again to find Gurdjieff groups in the Austin area, even though the Beshara was somehow also important. The Gurdjieff work hadn't left you yet, had it?
No, and actually, it was. Let me see. I went actually from the African thing, coming back, I went into the Beshara year-long final thing, which involved, you know, some time in Turkey. And then I had been invited by Mr. Bennett to open a dance academy for the Gurdjieff dancers in the Rotherhithe warehouses, and they were just about beginning to be reclaimed. And he felt that to get the younger people interested in these spiritual ideas. Dance was about the best method. And so he wanted to have the music changed so that it was more modern in its rhythmic and approach. But in the end, I turned that down. And that was when I did make the decision to go off to Texas.
But what was pulling you back to the Gurdjieff teachings?
I loved the dances. I had also had when I first saw the demonstration of the dances before I was involved with it as a discipline, that was where all my thinking ceased, and therefore all my normal world that I lived in went.
Your thinking ceased.
And I was just there. And so that's always remained with me. But I sometimes, Bennett based a lot of his ideas in Gurdjieff, but he himself took Gurdjieff's spirit and said, well, that's my starting point. Now I'm going to embrace this. So he looked, so I think there were a lot of other things that were in there. I did this one exercise, the decision exercise, for enabling you to envision, visualize a goal, a future event, a project, if you like, and make contact with it in the future so that it draws you to it. And I did that for 12 years, day by day.
And did it work?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think yoga, because I later discovered it was part of the household yoga. Yoga is definitely very, very practical.
Yes.
And it does affect you over a period of time.
Yes.
In what I found to be a very positive way.
Well, absolutely. How we are now is laying out our future, and how we were in the past, to some extent, is laying out our present. It's a well-known thing that you learn. That, yep.
Yeah.
There's so much to cover, and I just want to get some of the interesting details in here. To survive in Austin, you formed a painting and decorating business with Jimmy Carl Black, the drummer from the Mothers of Invention, and you basically employed musicians. It must have been a lot of fun, actually.
Well, it was. It kind of arose out of. I was at that time beginning to be a painter. I'd been a carpenter for a couple of years, and the guy who was head of that team with whom I was learning went to a party in Dallas, and he came back and said, I met a friend of yours in Dallas, Jimmy Carl Black from the Mothers of Invention. I said, wow. And so I got his phone number and called him out and said, well, how are you doing? He said, well, God damn it, man. Doesn't this world realize musicians need to live? And I said, so you're having difficulty with money. Why don't you come over and do what I've done? It's a funky place, great place to live. So he came over, and we both worked with that guy, and then neither of us could stand him. So we both got pushed out, and then formed our own company called the Gentlemen of Color, which in Texas is a questionable title. Yeah. And it got rid of a lot of people we would not wanted to paint it for. Yeah. And the guy who gave us that work, the first big commission we got, which was obtained while Jimmy Carl was nearly in a coma from drinking vodka. He was Native American in a high percentage of his ethnicity, and alcohol's not a thing they handle. So, but it was the guy who built all of the Whole Foods stores, which has just been bought for, I think,
$13.2 billion by Amazon.
There's a transition, isn't it? From yogurt to Amazon. Yeah, and so we had a lot of fun. We did have to quite often signed our houses after we'd finished painting, when they discovered that we were, which Jimmy Carr would always tell them, we were famous. I just used to get on with the painting, but Jimmy Carr used to love. And we had lots of adventures. There were a series of strange teams. One team that I was not on, but with some of my friends, were painting this house right out in the boondocks, where there was not much housing at all. And so the guy who'd commissioned them used to creep round in his car to make sure they was working. So one day they got fed up of that, and they decided they would teach him a lesson. So they put one person on guard, and then when they saw him sneaking through the trees in his car, the side roads, they all got completely naked and picked up shovels and pretended to be a rock group, bashing the oil cans and playing the rakes and things. And they were pounding away as he turned the corner and came across all these naked people. So it was a bit of a wild, even for painting, it was a bit of a wild.
Theatre was still there, eh?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I did get to be one of the good painters of Austin at that time. When they did the architectural display at the end of the year, they got me in to do some of the paintings. So I thought, oh well, there I am. And
your spiritual side was always so strong, and I just pulled out some quotes from the book here. How more and more you wished to help God, and J.G. Bennett had showed you this was possible, and you were trying to reach the essence, and you felt you had to really make the effort to wade through the identities which are not the real identities. And then there was a great quote, which from the Turkish tradition: hear about a hero, see a hero, be a hero. What does that mean to you now? Hear about a hero, see a hero, be a hero. Do you feel you're a hero now? Did you make it?
I don't see myself as anything like that. I see myself just, I'm living my life, and it's in this moment.
But isn't that a way the hero, the one who lives his life in this moment, is aware of that?
Possibly, although the heroes tend to be famous for what they're heroic in.
But did he mean that? Was that quote about that? Because I had a different, hear about a hero, see a hero, be a hero. I kind of interpret it different.
It was a mention of, you, like for instance, I heard about Mr. Bennett. I wanted to find this essence, and I heard about Mr. Bennett, so I went and met him, and he showed me how he had arrived at that and what the crux of it was. But as for think of myself in a way of someone who has done that, I don't really attach to it.
What did you feel about Bennett? Did you feel he was free?
I felt that where I was then, yes, I did. Where I am now, he quite possibly was.
Yeah.
Because there were things, when I asked him, for instance, about the whole of the Gurdjieff tradition, I said, okay, this is supposed, you've told me you're going to introduce me to absolute liberation, complete freedom. How many people have attained that through doing this? And he said, you mean amongst all the thousands? I said, yeah. And he said, possibly one, possibly two. And so I think a lot of people think they have arrived at something. And then as soon as they think that, they miss the point. So
at that time, I think it was also, you were quite drawn to solitude, weren't you? Being on your own and meditating a lot. And there was one, again, in the book, there's one retreat you were on. You're in solitude, and you said you came to the place where the presence of God was so strong that I'd be willing to sweep the floor for him. It's like there was a surrender and presumably a peacefulness that you found.
yes, and even the smallest action is enough. You don't have to be, doing some vast thing. And that was, very palpable. Just the livingness of it and the grace of it. Yeah, that was a moment. I remember that.
Yeah. Do you still feel that sometimes in life, that grace?
Now I feel completely different about God.
What do you feel about God now?
I feel that there is, if one wants to put it in words, a kind of energy from which everything comes, and which is living, loving, and is also totally beyond that. And if we can drop all the ideas we have of it in the moment, then there it is. It's all there. As soon as you call it something like God, it has so many connotations with it that I no longer want to do that,
No, I understand.
And it's also a case of if that energy is here and it's it is me saying these words, it is formless, it is everything all at once, then does it feel grateful to itself? That's a good question.
Does it feel grateful to itself?
That's a good question, isn't it?
Someone else that you spent a short time with was Darfree John.
Oh, yes.
You told me the other night, you told me a great story about Darfree John, which I'd love you to repeat.
Oh, well, after came to a much simpler way of looking at things. I started to meet people, and one of them was someone who had been doing practice for a while with Dafrijan. So I ended up being the only person invited to his jamboree who was not one of his direct students. And so I went and performed for him, and then I did get to know some of his teachings. And so I went back. This time it was in California. And I knew that he had, he says, well, we're all born free and knowing everything, but we build this thing around ourselves to protect ourselves from life and the world and everything. And my job, what I do is I bring you to a point and then prick this. So I decided, well, I'm going to do a demonstration for him and for the audience. And when he was performing, all the performers looked at him and had their backs to the audience. And so I thought, well, in my case, I'll perform to the audience because I want to do something. So I said, well, here we are. I'm your VJ for the evening, and I'm going to give you a demonstration of the great liberation. And he said, now, in your life, you build up a hard shell in your consciousness. I'm going to represent this with, and I'd found a condom. And so I thought, if I blow this up, that will be the sheath that we hide behind, and which will prevent real life. Yeah. So I hadn't realized it was an extra strength one. And so I blew it up and I said, yeah, this is your life going before you. Yeah, big car. You know, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm just about satisfied now. So I tied it up, and then I said, and now, with my conscious, whatever it was, I can't remember the term he used, I'm going to break this sheath and liberate you. You know, so I jumped on it. It wouldn't break. I stamped on it. I hurled myself on it, flat with my body, and it would not break. And fortunately, his devotees had been a little aghast to begin with, but he started to laugh, and he laughed and he laughed and he laughed, and I still couldn't get it to break. Right. So in the end, I had to retire, and the result of that was that his henchman came up to me afterwards and said, no one's ever got that close to their free John, or Adidar as he was known then. He says you can have anything you want. And I thought, I don't think there's anything you can give me, actually. Mm. So that was kind of the end of that whole process.
You see, you were just completely yourself, not trying to fit into his rules or to fit into the way his disciples were.
Yeah, because that was a strange thing. Yeah. And I have, reading his writings, phenomenal knowledge.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
And you also told me that Van Morrison was there afterwards, and he spent some time there. And as a result of that, he wrote the album No Guru, No Method, No Teacher. So obviously for him as well, something drew him, but it wasn't the answer.
Yeah. Yes.
There was 3 people you talk about in the book that you talk about having the same degree of awareness as Darfree John. You mentioned Mooji.
Yeah.
Satyananda, who I've both interviewed, and someone I hadn't heard of called Ganga. Did you meet her?
I did once in the Malvern Hills.
Where Satyananda lived, actually. He used to live there.
Satyananda?
Yes, he did, yeah.
It was at his place.
Oh, right,
Yeah. And I was sitting with him, and she came to visit. She was doing a visit to England to have a look, and brought out some of her closest students with her. And so I was sitting here. Satyananda was sitting here, and Ganga was sitting there. So I was between them. And at one point, I started crying, and she said, "Oh, what's the matter? What did the?" And I suddenly realized, well, it's all that's happening, but there's something much more important than mine. So I just said it doesn't matter, and there was something in her look when she said that I just thought, oh. And initially I thought there's something different about her as a teacher, and I wondered whether it was because it's a woman and it's a different. But in the end, I realized no, that's not it. It was just extremely pure, and to me, a total example of living life in the moment.
Yeah.
And she said to me once, look, when it comes to students and teaching, she doesn't ever have a big following. She keeps it very pure, which is... and so she said, I'm quite happy doing my gardening. I could do it. That'd be enough. But then there's the grandchildren, so that's wonderful. I love that. And then, if anybody comes and starts talking about this, well, then I can't help myself but engage in it.
Yeah.
But I don't go out and look for people,
Yeah.
And so for me it was a very wonderful meeting, and I thought Satyananda's was very pure. I had some contact with Mooji, or Tony Moo as he was then, and he was very helpful at that point. But for me, the more there was something.
Yeah.
And that sort of, while I was with her, I came to a point where, if you like, life itself is the meditation. There's no form whatsoever. And there was no need to look further. It doesn't mean to say that one doesn't have a lot of things to incorporate into that.
But it is a relief to realise that, isn't it?
That there is no end. You'll never reach the end because there is no end to reach.
Life itself is the meditation, is the way,
Yeah.
Well, what also intrigued me was, and we touched a little bit on this in part 2, when you were working in Israel with wounded soldiers, you did I think you did a course in counselling, and then you formed with Jim Maxwell healing songs therapy. And so here you were working as a therapist now. You've done so many different things. Actually working as a therapist, people would come to you and presumably tell you their problems and they didn't work in their life. And you, with Jim, you devised a method where you would write a song, sing a song to your various clients, and that was in itself had a healing quality.
Yeah. Jim was a very wonderful counsellor. He's still doing that in Austin now. And so we hit on the method. He would do the talking. And because he had seen me once when we were studying together, the therapy, in the group counselling teaching, I did a thing where I went around each of the students and encapsulated what I'd seen of what they were. And the professor was very positive about that. So Jim thought, okay, let's get together and see what we can put together. And we came up with the idea that Jim would talk, I would listen, and then that would enable me to listen to the undercurrents that Jim was having to move around because he was leading the session. And then I could bring them out and put them in a kind of wide context because a lot of people are upset and it manifests in various different ways. Their balance is askew. So you give them a wider context where they fit, and then everything is more easily balanced. But also it would address their personal issues, and out would come, I dealt with it mainly in images, which are a lot less contentious than arguments. And so it would come out as a sonic poem, and occasionally it would have, a chorus and everything, or it might be just a lot of words sung in musical form, but without the normal song structure. And then we would record that, and we would give them that at the end of the session, and they would take it away and listen to it. And if they really found it valuable, they keep listening on now and again to it.
What kind of response did they give you in terms of the feedback you had?
Some people came back several years later saying they were still getting more out of it.
Yeah.
We did sessions with clinical psychologists, qigong masters, sheriffs, the town sheriffs, and they all said, it had been a very valuable way to access some of their own hidden feelings and perhaps even perceptions they'd buried,
And do you feel that comes out in the music you make? Do you feel there's a vibration, or there's an energy that's affecting people emotionally? I don't mean just feeling good, I mean going beyond that, a depth.
Well, I feel like when I'm performing, a kind of thing happens for me where, unless something dreadful is happening with the sound, which can be distracting, I sing, I dance, words come improvised on most evenings. And I am in a place where I'm just resting at peace, and all of this is happening. So I think that because particularly live music is an interchange between the audience and the artist, that there is definitely it's almost like the music, because it embraces everybody in the audience, more than, say, a single voice over here would do, can engage their feelings, their thinking, their bodies. And if at the core of that there is a living stillness, or silence, they will feel it, and some of them will enter it. So I think it does have a deep...
Is that ironical that here you are, you're going on stage, you're known as pretty wild, the music is quite loud, and you're talking about the core of stillness.
Yeah.
You are in when you're on stage.
Yes.
And that's palpable, you feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not actually there, thinking, oh, I'll put my hand out, I'll do this, I'll do that. It just comes.
Yeah.
And the notes come, and of course my body's learned the tunes, but there is this whole openness to create in the moment. And my band members have said, because obviously they play in various lineup, this is the one for them where they have the most freedom.
Mm.
And that affects the audience.
Yeah. It's, it just goes back so often, isn't it, like you were with Darfree John. You were yourself in that moment. And something opened by the sound of it with him. It doesn't normally open. And then it's the same with your music. And the core of that is the silence.
Yes. And it's the silence that opens people, really.
The silence that opens people. So ironical, you're at a concert. So I'm afraid we've only got a few minutes left, but I wanted to just cover briefly, you became very ill. You had a brain hemorrhage, didn't you, on stage?
Yes.
You weren't well, and you were basically carried off with a stretcher. Very dramatic. You had a brain hemorrhage.
I had finished house painting, and I was trying to detox the whole body of all the things that had gone in from the lacquering, all the metals and everything, and I overdid it, apparently.
You overdid the detoxing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I weakened the constitution. So whereas on the previous year we had done, I think, 41 concerts in 42 days, here it was, and it was I think the 28th of 30 on the second year. And although in the first year I'd come off, and at the end of the tour I was feeling twice as energetic as when I'd started, on this occasion I'd done all that fasting and overdone it. And so I got the brain hemorrhage, which in the end I became grateful for, very thankful, because there was a time in the recovery from that when I couldn't get out of the present moment. The energy was not there.
Yeah.
So here I was, everything was quite simple, nothing to be worried or concerned about. And then, of course, it all crept back again. But that left me open to thinking, okay, then the people who present this very simple approach of everybody is already what they look for, and that there isn't a path to get to it. It's just realizing how it is. That became a gift from it for me.
Yeah. And you took homeopathy, didn't you? That also helped you, the homeopathic remedies.
And also Ayurvedic ones.
Yes.
Two gentlemen in London. Yeah.
Okay. It's a shame because time is very finite and we need to finish the part 3. In 2002, you toured with Robert Plant.
Yes.
It must have been great fun.
Oh, yeah. And we had some really good conversations, and it was really lovely. A great person to tour with. He has had a history that is not equaled by many people in that profession, and he's still, alive in his music. And he was a great host to us. He had, trucks with equipment, trucks with cooks, and so we had a great time. And he had just called up the office, I think 3 weeks before, and I was doing a tour with my acoustic line trio, Nick Pinn and Chris Bryant. And so he called up his office and said, I'd like a band like Arthur Brown. So they thought, oh, well, we'll call up Arthur Brown if Robert wants a band like Arthur Brown. And it just happened that there was only one of his gigs conflicted with the Pretty Things tour. Yeah. So I did both of them.
Yeah.
And Robert was creating such beautiful music. And we had great laughs and, good talks.
And you should explain your latest album, Zim Zam Zim. Is it Zim Zam Zim?
Yeah.
So it's a science fiction in a way, but it's not just science fiction. Is it? Just briefly, just talk us through how you got the idea and what the album is.
Well, I'd always liked Shazam, the Captain Marvel or Captain America, as a name, as a word to shout, and then you're suddenly. And so I was talking with Sam Walker and Jim Mortimer, who were in my band, and we decided we'd do an album that followed the same kind of approach as, say, Johnny Cash's one when he was doing his final album, which was to get back to his original and see where he'd gone from there. So we did. We took the dark image, exploring transformation, going beyond duality, and I came up overnight after that conversation with Sam and Jim with this whole story, and I couldn't work out. I was going to call it Zim Zam, and then I thought, oh no, Zim Zam Zim. That's I don't know why, it just sounded great. And it was a character who discovers and is himself a portal to the spiritual world and the way of looking at things. And obviously this put him in this thing in conflict with the people who were buying, the modern capitalists who were buying up all the land, particularly the land high above water, in case global warming was correct. And so there was this attempt to save the earth, which was being flooded. And the question that it raised was, would you go through the portal and then go somewhere else in the universe, or would you stay here and try and see if you could make your home into a beautiful place again? And there are different characters who are before going through the portal or after.
Right. Okay. Well, I listened to it twice in the car, and the thing that I love more than anything else is the power of your voice. You're 75 years old, and your voice is still powerful, and it just shows that energetically there's something really strong still behind you, and the lyrics are very interesting too. So we're almost there time-wise, but I just wanted to leave us with a quote from the book, which was written about you by Polly Marshall.
Oh yes,
the god of hellfire.
She had a lot of fun and agony creating that book.
The funny thing is, you don't seem like a god of hellfire. You seem like a very gentle soul. The quote was that I liked: "Who am I? Not my body, not my thoughts. My mind is at peace. I can bear without the slightest restlessness or manifestations all thoughts and images that arise, both pleasant and painful. Suddenly I know that this awareness of all and everything is itself a limitation. Subjects, objects and consciousness are one and the same," which is very wise. So we're finished on a wise note. And there's also lots of, just so we get the commercial side in, latest album, lots of albums that you can buy over the years.
Most of all of them out on Cherry Red.
Many
too,
of them
yeah.
are. And we didn't, one here with us, Vincent Crane, who sadly died, which we didn't talk about. We haven't got time to do that now, but very sadly died. Okay, Arthur, thanks very much again for coming up and talking with me and concluding part 3 of the Arthur Brown story. And maybe we do something again soon, because there's so much to talk to you about.
It's been a really enjoyable experience, and it's been great to be given the opportunity to talk about these things.
Good,
And,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and thanks for watching, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye. Hello again, you've just watched part 3 of the Arthur Brown story, and we had the spontaneous idea of Arthur doing a healing meditation with sound where he'll just sing. He talked about earlier in the interview about how he worked a few years ago with sound with individual people. They'd come for a session and they'd leave with a tape with music and sound on it, which would help them for many years afterwards with the vibration from that sound. So we're going to try something now. Arthur will tune in his own way to people that are going to watch, and we'll just see what happens as a little experiment. So I hope you enjoy it. Oh.